Announcement yesterday from the Electricity Minister, that government will now procure 2,500 megawatts of nuclear energy. It will, of course, take around 10 years to build the reactors that will generate that power. At the same time, government due to release the Integrated Resource Plan this week, while on Friday last week, Dan Marikane announces the new CEO of Eskom. He'll start work there in March. Professor Mark Swilling is the co-director of the Centre for Sustainability Transitions at the University of Stellenbosch. Professor Swilling, good afternoon to you, and thanks for your time. There's a huge amount going on in our electricity space at the moment. Firstly, do we need 2,500 megawatts of nuclear power?
Well, it's going to take at least 12 to 15 years to build a nuclear power station. And that means we are looking at, say, 2025, late 2030s for that to come online. That's only 2,500 megawatts. By then, we will have built a much larger quantity of renewable energy, and we will have closed down quite a few coal mines. So 2,500 by that stage, at a very high cost compared to solar, doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
Nuclear energy can have some advantages, and I think you know I'm not a nuclear lobbyist, but they'll argue it's generally very reliable. It's always on. It doesn't create any emissions. There's a very low carbon footprint. Are there some things that we should be using nuclear for? And you'll know, Professor, there are still some base loadists out there, some people who believe we need base load power.
Yeah, I mean, there are those who argue that you need nuclear for what they call base load. In other words, a fundamental base of load that is required to meet demand that is not met by renewable energy. However, it comes at an extremely high cost. Variable renewable energy is coming down in price. That's solar, wind, plus battery backup, plus some gas backup, is probably what our system is going to look like within the next decade. And to then bring in 2,500, which is actually quite a small amount of so-called base load, doesn't really make a lot of sense given the price. And I keep on emphasizing the price of nuclear.
There are some people who suggest that nuclear energy, I mean, we spoke to Dave Nichols, he's the chair of NECSA, the Nuclear Energy Corporation, yesterday. He suggested that, in fact, nuclear energy per kilowatt hour is very cheap. I know there are lots of different ways to look at the numbers. You suggest it's not cheap at all.
It's not cheap at all. If you only look at the cost of the price of electricity coming from Coburg, and you exclude the cost of finance and you exclude the construction cost, yes, it looks low at about 60 cents per kilowatt hour. But recently, Lazard, which is a very authoritative source of data on finance and infrastructure matters globally, and is their transaction advisor to Eskom, has estimated that nuclear at the moment is between $141 and $221 per megawatt hour. Compare that to utility scale solar, which is coming in at between $46 and $102 per megawatt hour, and coal is at between $68 and $166 per kilowatt hour. So nuclear is a lot more expensive. And Clyde Mallison has taken those numbers and used Eskom numbers in order to come up with estimates in rands. And the rand estimate is R3.63 per kilowatt hour for nuclear compared to solar PV at 78 cents and coal at R1.87. So, you know, I don't know where Nichols is getting his numbers, but they seem out of line with many of the biggest authoritative reports around the world at the moment.
I was interested in the fact that yesterday it was the Electricity Minister, who announced the procurement of nuclear power. And in the past, before Ramokgopa was appointed, it was usually the Energy Minister, Gwede Mantashe, who made these announcements. Is it actually up to the Electricity Minister? Who in government makes these decisions nowadays? And I know that sometimes can be difficult to see.
Well, as you know, we've got three ministers who are responsible for electricity / energy in one way or another. And it is very puzzling for a lot of us as to why the Minister of Electricity made an announcement about nuclear procurement before the publication of the IRP. And the IRP is our national electricity plan, and it is supposed to specify what the technology mix looks like, and that is only for consultation. In other words, after consultation, we can assume that nuclear may or may not be, depending on who's listening and what the evidence suggests, in the IRP, and yet we have a declaration up front before the publication of the IRP of a request for proposals for 2,500 megawatts to come out in March, April next year. A lot of people are very puzzled by this, and some are smelling a rat.
You say smelling a rat. Do you think the electricity minister is trying to push something? I mean, could there be some political agenda here? And we've seen, it wasn't quite a dispute, but we've seen what looked like a little bit of contestation between Mantashe and Ramokgopa over who would have which power in this space.
Well, yes, I mean, that's kind of old news and just keeps out simmering away. But some people, and I'm not suggesting I buy this because I haven't looked at the evidence, but some people are starting to join the dots and say, is there a Russian story here? For example, the Gazprom deal has been approved by cabinet, which brings the Russians into gas. We know the Russians have put a huge amount of pressure on the government since the court struck out the nuclear deal that Zuma did with Putin, and Putin has not given up pressurizing the South African government on that. So, you know, is behind this a conspiracy that this is really about resurrecting the Russian deal? That's what some people are asking.
Within the integrated resource plan, when it is released later this week, and it's curious that it's sort of in the December period, I mean, it's being released literally as the whole country goes on holiday. What are you expecting? Are you expecting big changes to what government is going to be planning?
Well, I think we can expect that the prolongation of the life of the old coal-fired power stations will be formalized, which will contradict the 2019 IRP, which recommended the closure of the old coal-fired power stations. So I think we can see some reversal on that. We'll probably see a more specific reference to the inclusion of nuclear to in a sense, retrospectively back up what the Minister of Electricity has done. And I think we can also anticipate an increase in the amount of renewables consistent with what has already been agreed. And there's about 30 gigawatts of renewables in the pipeline at the moment. That includes the nearly 5 gigawatts on rooftops.
In the middle of all of this is Eskom, and still Eskom has to execute some of the decisions that government is making. It's getting a new CEO only in March. Does a new CEO make much of a difference? Does one person make a big difference in Eskom? Or some of the decisions that Eskom just has to implement being made really above the pay grade of CEO? They're sort of political decisions in a way.
Well, in order to answer that, Stephen, if I could go back to your previous question about the IRP, and I think a follow-up question would be, is it relevant anymore? And yes, the IRP was relevant in 2019 and marking out the playing field. I have very much doubt that the new IRP is going to be taken that seriously within the financial markets, which have already made decisions on what the future energy system looks like. And so it's within that context that you have a new Eskom CEO stepping into a job where almost on the morrow of him taking over an integrated utility, it's going to get unbundled into three different pieces. And the National Transmission Company of South Africa actually becomes the new center of gravity of our energy system. And he'll be left holding a declining generation business. So he's taking over as CEO at an absolutely critical time of transition. And so what we hope he is an effective transition manager that's going to give birth, once the Energy Regulation Amendment Act is passed, to a completely new energy system. So, yeah, he is critical, but in a sense, he's taking over a job that becomes less relevant. And all of that within the context of an IRP that's probably not going to be as significant as the 2019 version.
All of this suggests to something that you've suggested before, Professor Swilling, that in fact government has really lost control of electricity in some ways. Sort of the private sector is doing some of it, and basically government doesn't have nearly the control that it once did.
Yes, I do think we're in the midst of a disorderly transition. And some people would argue that, well, all transitions are disorderly. I'm not sure I fully agree with that market-oriented perspective. I think there are many examples around the world of energy transitions in particular which have been effectively guided by policy and public policy. What we have now is a kind of reactive public policy that doesn't anticipate the consequences. The exception to that is the Energy Regulation Act, which is very well worked out and there is a sense of some of the implications of that reform. But most South Africans, and including many players in the energy sector, I don't think have fully recognized the full implications of the complete transformation of our current state-driven energy supply system dominated by a vertically integrated utility to a more market-based multi-player system.
Professor Mark Swilling, thank you, Co-Director at the Centre for Sustainability Transitions at the University of Stellenbosch. Really appreciate the time.